Hello, everybody. This is David Rubens, sitting in London. I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar, wherever you are in the world. And the beauty of this technology is that you can sit anywhere in the world and sit in and be part of this community. I'd like to thank, before we start, the Institute of Risk Management for hosting this event. And I'd like to thank you for taking time out of what I'm sure are very busy lives to sit in and to share this time with myself and with the other people sitting in here. What I'd like to do over the next 75 minutes is to take some time to share with you some thoughts on what it means to look at risk and crisis management in the 21st century from a strategic perspective. If you are listening in to this webinar, then the likelihood is that in some aspects of your life you're involved with or responsible for developing, managing, and implementing risk and crisis management programs in some sort of organization, and taking responsibility for creating frameworks that will create a safe working environment for those around you, but also to have the capability that in the event that an unwanted event was to occur, that you could step forward and take leadership, working with others to create appropriate responses in the face of challenging events of whatever scale and scope, whether they are minor, major, or true crisis events. Although I know nothing about who you are individually and personally, I think I can make two predictions about how you spend your working lives. And the truth of the matter is that if you're involved in risk and crisis management or security management, whether it's business continuity, emergency response, resilience, and all the other words we use, the truth of the matter is that within your working lives, you're probably trying to achieve two things, or have the responsibility for achieving two things. The first is to create capability within your own unit, within your own organization for which you are responsible. And not only to create capability, but to create excellence. Excellence of service that can support the overarching and underlying objectives of your organization. One moment. Okay, I've just had a message coming in that my voice is repeating. Is that better? If somebody could send me a message saying whether that is better, then hopefully that will be okay. If not, then I will close down and move to another line, and I'd ask you to just give me some patience for a couple of minutes. Can somebody let me know if that is better? If you can send me a message. I'll wait to see if that's coming through. I'll keep talking until I get a message saying whether that's better or not. Okay, I can actually hear my own voice repeating. I would ask you please to give me some patience. I'm going to close this line down. Okay, Mark, thank you for that. I see your message. I would ask your patience. I'm going to close this line down. I'm going to come back on another line, and I'll be with you in a couple of minutes. Okay. Okay. I'm here now. Is everybody hearing us? If somebody can give me a message that you can hear me, then hopefully we can carry on. Can somebody give me a message coming back? Can somebody let me know if they're hearing me? Sounds better? Okay, I'm gonna presume you can hear me now. So the truth of the matter is that you will be responsible for developing two things. One is excellence within your own part of the organization under norming operation status, and that will allow you to support the operation and the organization, but also to step forward if there is a problem and to create innovative solutions in the face of the challenges you're facing. But the other responsibility that you will be having is to create interoperability or relationships or engagement with other organizations around you. And the truth of the matter is that when it comes to a challenging event, it is likely that the breakdown in terms of crisis management response will be the inability to create complex and interoperability frameworks that will allow you to manage the crisis effectively. So whilst you might have excellence within your own part of the organization, it is the ability to create the connectivity with other organizations around you, which is a challenging event. So what I'd like to look at today is crisis in a 21st century environment or context from two perspectives. The first is, what does a crisis look like? And particularly, what does a 21st century crisis look like? And secondly, what are some of the challenges that creates for us as organizations in terms of managing and being responsible for the response? The truth of the matter is that I think everybody who's involved in risk and crisis management will accept and acknowledge that over the last 25 years, the nature of the crises or the nature of the risk environment within which we're working has changed radically. The world is both more unstable, it is also more interconnected, it is more globalized. Problems become instantaneous problems rather than creeping problems. They spread, they escalate, they cascade. And to a large extent, we are much less in control of the environment we're operating in. And yet, it's easy to ask whether, as risk and crisis managers, our capabilities and our understanding of the risk environment has grown to the same extent. So can we claim that our capabilities have developed in the same way that the nature and the scale of the problems have developed? And I think the truth of the matter is that if we look at that, the answer is probably no, and we may well be behind the curve in terms of understanding what true crisis events are about. If we look at the newspaper or the television every day, there seems to be examples of situations that escalate into crisis events which people are unprepared for, which they claim are unexpected, which we don't have the ability to manage. And yet when we look into them, they are actually part of the normal operating environment that we're all operating in. So today we're going to be looking at two things. One is the issues of the external events and the crisis, and the second is our response. In terms of the situations that we're dealing with, I think it's fair to say that there is no such thing anymore as a simple problem, a simple crisis. Crises themselves are complex events. Our organizations are complex. The environment we're operating is complex, and the solutions we have to develop are complex. And therefore, as risk and crisis managers, we have to understand how complexity affects us. And to put it into its most simple terms, I think we can say that complexity affects us in four ways. It affects the scale of the problems, in that the problems we're dealing with are much larger than they were in a previous generation. The scope, they affect us in different ways, much more complex ways. The impact, how it affects us when the crises occur, and the consequences, how that develops over time as a result of what has happened. So, for example, a satellite failure in 2018 is much more significant than a satellite failure in 1995 would have been. A critical national infrastructure failure is much more complex. A hurricane creates, or flooding creates, more complex situations, etc., etc. So the first thing we can say about 21st century crises is that they are very big and they are very messy. So on the screen just now, I've put up a shot of some of the issues that we look at when we talk about 21st century risk and crisis management. Natural disasters, I think we're all aware that natural disasters now are more common. The world is becoming more unstable. Nature is becoming more dramatic. The scale of those natural disasters of flooding, of tornadoes, of hurricanes, etc., is becoming greater. And the impact on our societies is certainly becoming greater. If we look at national infrastructures, most national infrastructures are old. They're being pushed beyond their natural lifetimes, and they're also being pushed beyond their natural capabilities. They're often underfunded, and they're often reaching the level which could be considered as dysfunctional. Terrorism, as we all know, is changing. We still have the classical terrorist incident of a car bomb or a suicide bomber, but we're now seeing more and more cyber terrorism. We're seeing, as we saw in London or in the UK recently, chemical attacks, biological attacks, radiological attacks, etc., etc. And certainly, if we look into the next 10 years, it is likely that will develop as well. Social disorder is something that affects us all. The world is a tough place. Most cities are only 24 hours away from potentially going into social disorder situations. We can see that in Germany, for example, recently, in America. We see it in Venezuela. We've seen what happens in Qatar, even in Barcelona. These are cities which we would not traditionally consider as unstable. And yet in the present world, it would be very easy to imagine a major city coming to a situation where it could be considered almost uncontrollable. Pandemic is a scary one for anybody involved in strategic risk and crisis management. Pandemic is a scary one. We haven't had a true pandemic since the influenza after the First World War. But with the current world situation, modern travel, overcrowding, urbanization, then it is likely that at some stage during the lives of the people listening to this webinar that we will have a major pandemic. The truth is, none of us know how that will affect us or the world, but it is something that we need to consider when looking at risk and crisis management in a 21st century context. Cyber attacks is massive now, both from malicious attacks from governments and government agencies, from rogue terrorists, and just from people who are moving around on the dark web and on the web itself and taking people down. That can be done in terms of data removal or hijacking, but also in terms of things ransomware, for example, where malicious attackers are threatening the existence or the viability of organizations. Okay, so that's the bad news. That's the picture. So let's have a look at what that means to us. I think that one of the things that we have to think about is what does a 21st century city look like? I've been involved in a number of major city planning projects, and often we consider cities now, the clever word is smart cities which are hyper-connected, which are autonomous, self-managing, which have a high level of technology underpinning them. And it is easy to think of the 21st century city and easy to think of a 21st century city as she's seen on the screen, as a Dubai or as a New York, London, Madrid, Barcelona, etc., etc. The truth of the matter is that for most people living in cities in the 21st century, that's not what a city looks like. The city I've just put up on the screen is much more like that. Now, if I said that was a favela in Rio de Janeiro, or if it was something in Bangkok, or in Vietnam, or in Laos, or in South America, or in Cairo, then you'd probably accept that. It's actually in Lagos, in Nigeria, West Africa. But modern cities in the developing world are not hyper-connected. They are very low-level, low-managed organisms. And if we look at the map on the screen right now, these are the 15 megacities in the world from a couple of years ago. And out of those megacities, all of them except one, which is Delhi, have something in common, which is that they're on the coast. If we look at the growth of megacities, a megacity is 10 million people or more, over the next 12 years up until 2030, which is not far away, there's expected to be about 30 to 35 megacities, all of which are likely to be on the coast, and all of which are in the developing world. And what that means to us, in terms of how that affects us, the fact that we're living under those conditions in global cities on the coast, is that at some stage the world is going to look like this. When I started talking about this 20 years ago, I used to say that within the lifetime of the people I was talking to, the world would be underwater. We've already achieved that. These are no longer anomalous or rare events. They are the nature of cities and how we live there. The top pictures are, I believe, Manila in the Philippines. The bottom ones are Paris from last year. But the question has to be, what does the world look like if our major cities are underwater? I spent 2.5 years in Lagos in Nigeria. And Lagos, for example, spends 4 months of the year underwater pretty much. This impacts on every aspect of our lives in terms of an urban context. I'm getting comments from Mark about audio interruptions. If there's anybody there having a problem, please feel free. And Mark says he cannot see anything on screen. I can't see why. Hang on a second, let me just see. That should be better. That should be better, hopefully. You should be seeing on the screen, I hope there. I'm getting questions in from Mark, but I'm not getting any comments in from anybody else. So please do feel free to let me know if there's any problems here. Otherwise, I'm going to presume that things are okay. I see I still have over 200 people viewing, so hopefully you are getting something. Otherwise, you would have turned off. Unless I hear anything else, I'm going to presume that things are going well. So what we have is cities underwater. So that's one thing that's going to affect us. For example, in London, one of our high priority issues is flooding, and yet every hospital has an emergency generating system. All of those generators are in the basement. So if you have emergency generating systems in the basement in a flooding environment, that's not particularly helpful. So that's the issue. Now, the problem with flooding, as an example, is it doesn't just hit you where it is. Yes, Mark, I've seen that you've got asked about the political conflicts. I'll come back to that in a second. So the issue is not just the flooding, but the impact it has on the environment. So if we go to this, for example, these are all issues that might happen within a flooding environment. So the truth of the matter is that from our perspective, in terms of crisis and risk management, okay. Yeah, thanks for that, Mark. So what happens is, in terms of a major crisis, in terms of flooding, for example, or any other crisis, it's not just how it impacts on you, but how it impacts on the environment. And if the environment itself is denuded or degraded, then any response plan that you might have will not work. So, for example, if the railways are down, the roads are down, if a bridge goes down, then your ability to respond according to your plan just disappears immediately. And the truth of the matter is, from our perspective, from a strategic perspective, if the environment itself is stable and operable, and you can operate within it, it should not be a crisis. A crisis is when the environment and the infrastructure, for example, communications, transport, power goes down, then that's a true crisis. So let's move on to the next slide, and then look what happens, what the next issue is. The first issue is environmental issues around things like flooding. The second is urbanization. This is a major city. This is Dhaka in Bangladesh. But if I said it was Bangkok, or if it was Cairo, Rio de Janeiro, if I said it was Lagos, then you wouldn't be too far wrong. So the question is, how do you operate within an urban environment like that? And the thing to remember is, when we look at this picture of Dhaka, this is not a city in crisis. This is a city just trying to get to work in the morning. So the first issue is that if we do have a crisis, the likelihood is that we will not be able to move. So any crisis management program which presumes you can move is likely to fail pretty damn quickly. The world that we're operating in, so that's the environment, that's the city, and that's the environment. We can now look at the infrastructure and Hi, everybody. I'm back again. My apologies. I think there's a lesson here. Never trust technology. So I think it's the truth. If we have I'm not sure if we've got technical problems on this side, but hopefully we're back up and running now, and hopefully you're still listening to me. Okay, so let's move forward with the slides. And the truth of the matter is, as well as the external environment, the infrastructure environment within which we're operating, I think the only word to use it nowadays is fragile. That fragility affects us in many, many ways, all of which are usually unexpected. They're often shocking, they're often sudden, they're often global, instantaneous. So what we have up here on this slide is just three examples of an ATM failure. Now, ATM, as we know, the world in many societies is moving to almost a cashless society. And if we said right now that ATM systems failed, banking systems failed, and every bank account in the world read 000, and as of now, literally this minute, you and everybody around you and everybody in the streets and everybody in the buildings had to survive on the money that was in their pocket and had no access to money, no access to ATMs, no access to cash cards. It's almost impossible to understand what that means in terms of 21st century society. And it doesn't really matter why that happens. From a crisis management perspective, it doesn't matter what the triggering event is. We're trying to manage our consequences. And so we have here three examples. Hackers take down the most wide country in Europe. This was from a Russian-directed program against Estonia and took them down for 3 weeks. Lloyds and TSB customers went angry as IT glitches ATMs. So there's basically a problem within the system. And RSB computer failed caused by inexperienced operative in India. So they were trying to do an upgrade or an upload. That had been subcontracted out to somebody who had been subcontracted out to a program in India. All of the subcontractors, of course, basically going on lowest cost basis. And then somebody pushed the wrong button and took the systems down. Now, once that happens, what usually happens is that the organization involved will then claim that they can recover it. It's limited. They'll be back in operation within 3 hours or 6 hours. And often, as the program develops, it becomes clear that it is more complex than they believe. And that then the time to recovery will take longer. The recovery will not be as complete as they predict, and the impacts will be ongoing and long-term. Here we have a situation in New York, in Northeast America, in 2003, a blackout. 45 million people in the States, 10 million people in Ontario, Canada. If you can read that slide, what it says is the initial triggering event was overloaded power lines hitting unpruned tree foliage, causing a local cutout. So what it is, somebody had not cut the trees, somebody had not cut the branches, and that was enough to create a small little issue. Then what happened is the blackout, the primary cause was a software bug in the alarm system at the control room of the Energy Corporation, and a lack of alarm, so the alarm went off. So basically a 25-cent bulb didn't go off and warn the operators, and therefore they were unaware of the need to do anything about it. So it's easy to think of 21st century crisis as cataclysmic, as something being massive from outside, the equivalent of an asteroid or an earthquake or a tsunami. Most of the time it's because of basic failures within our own organizational management structures and frameworks, and we just get unlucky. So let's try and put a framework, let's try and put a structure around that. If we're going to discuss risk and crisis management in a rational way, we need to have a structured language to understand that. So what we look at is in terms of crises, they tend to be overwhelming. Everybody has a plan. I imagine that every organization that you are working with has a crisis plan. The problem with crisis plans is when we actually have a crisis, the word that is almost always used is that they are overwhelming. And almost from the beginning, it becomes, right from the start of the crisis situation, it becomes aware that whatever we thought we could do or whatever we thought we had in place is no longer appropriate and no longer applicable within that environment. This is a picture of Houston, Texas. Now, I imagine that Houston, Texas has a crisis management plan and probably has a flooding management plan. But when the flooding is at the scale as is demonstrated in this picture, the likelihood is whatever plan that they have will not be applicable. And therefore, you start having to make stuff up pretty well on an ongoing basis rather than trusting your plans and programs which are in place. So
what we have is we have a hierarchy of events. We have to have if we're going to discuss this, we have to have a classification of some sorts. And we have 4 classifications here. We have a standard incident, a routine emergency. We have a major incident, which is the next scale up in red, and then we move on to a true crisis. A standard incident would be something that has local impact, known responses, clear solutions, and a limited timeline. Standard operational procedures. It should be something that you're comfortable with. It's part of your normal operating processes. And to be honest, nothing to get excited about. We can now move up to the next level, which is routine emergency. And routine emergency has 2 concepts in it. One is routine, so that's known, normal, and accepted. And the other is emergency, which means sudden, unexpected, and challenging. But nevertheless, for any organization which has a decent and well-developed risk management framework, there should be the capability to both understand and model and to deal with routine emergencies. A routine emergency would have significant impact, but it would nevertheless be a localized event. It's something that you have under your control. It's controlled by you. So, for example, within your building, there may be a routine emergency, but it's nevertheless something that you understand. You have well-defined responses. So, for example, if you had to do an evacuation, that would be under a routine emergency, and hopefully you have a business continuity plan. So the business continuity plan would allow you to manage that in a structured way. If we move up to the next level, which is the major incident, that is something which doesn't just affect you, but impacts the environment. So if, for example, you had a gas explosion outside your building and you had to clear that block or that area, that is no longer something that affects just you. You are affected because of the environmental impact. You are no longer in control of the response. It will have longer-term impacts in terms of potential recovery and return, and it might be that there's been some structural damage to your building. It may well be that it's 3 months before you can come back. And therefore, you have what are called loosely structured responses. You have an idea of what your objective you're trying to achieve, and yet within that, you have to create emergent and innovative solutions depending on how the situation develops. But you should also have a major incident management plan, which allows you to sort of move up the hierarchy, become more strategic, interoperative, work with other agencies around you and create some sort of solution which allows you to maintain functionality as much as possible within the constraints of that particular situation, which itself may well be chaotic and unstable and unclear in the way it's developing. However, it is still a rational problem. It is a rational problem in that you can sit there and you can work with people around you and you can create solutions. If we go into a crisis by definition is not a rational problem. It threatens the organization's existence. It involves destruction of infrastructure. So an earthquake doesn't just break down a building, but it breaks down the roads, the airports, the ports, the communications, the water, the sanitation, etc. And therefore the destruction of your building is only a very small part of a much wider context. The other thing about a crisis is because it is so large, so messy, so unclear, it has no end solution. So, for example, major flooding, that can go on for 10 years. So there's no win situation. And to be honest, a crisis situation is where your major incident management plan fails. It goes beyond that. It transcends that. And the truth of the matter is that if your plan does work, then it is no longer a crisis. A crisis is not only when your plan doesn't work, but your plan becomes meaningless because it has misunderstood the nature and the scale and the scope and the impact of the event you're trying to face. And a lot of the time, when we look at post-event reviews within a crisis, one of the things that the planners say is, we didn't think it would be like that. It was just the word that comes up in the executive summaries, and I recommend that you read as many executive summaries as you can. But after every crisis, there is an there is a report, a review, an inquiry. They put out a report. The report has an executive summary of a couple of pages, and one of the words that is almost always used is overwhelming. And so what we can do is we can take those 4 things, and for those of you who've got an academic background, you might recognize Rittel and Weber's theory or principles of hierarchy of events. Hierarchy of events, just very quickly, because I am an academic and I like to throw something academic in there. basically says that we have three potential sorts of situations. Tame problems are known, they're understood, they're rational, we can sort them out, and we've got a win situation. The second thing is loosely structured problems. So we have the first part, a tame problem is a little car crash. That's fine. Everybody understands that. The second one is the closure of a motorway. This is the M1 motorway being closed in London. Now, obviously, that will have more of an impact. It will spread geographically. More agencies will be involved. It might take a longer time frame. And yet it is still a situation which is known and understood to the agencies responding, and they should have an understanding of what they need to do to sort it out and roughly how long it will take, so they can engage with it in a rational basis. If we move up to what Rick and Webber would call wicked problems, which is this situation, a snowbound city, then the truth of the matter is this is no longer rational. There's multiple sensors, there's an inability to respond, lack of information. The situation itself is rapidly degrading. You have a huge time pressure to respond, an inability to prioritize, what is the most important thing within that, and there's certainly no win situation. There's no overarching, clear framework which allows you to move forward to an objective which you can share and then work towards together. So that's a situation within a hierarchy of events, and really I think that most organizations, pretty well organizations, are able to deal with tame problems quite effectively, and we have a good understanding of basic risk and crisis management now. So that is, we have that. Then we have, sorry, I was trying to read that, I lost that. So basically what we have is the wicked problems. Yeah, most organizations are understanding tame problems. We have a good understanding now of how to do risk management. Most organizations have people they employ who are trained, often have a degree in risk and crisis management, can support the organization. When we move up to loosely structured problems, they probably have the capability to respond in some way. May not be 100% effective, but will be appropriate to the situation. But most organizations, and that includes government agencies, when we move up to wicked problems, they get knocked off their feet, just like anybody would in a tsunami, and it overwhelms them. So what we've done so far is we've looked at the external environment. What does it mean if we talk in terms of a true crisis event, in terms of the environment, the destruction of the infrastructure, the impact it has on us? What I'd like to do now is to move to the other side of the equation and look at what does that mean in terms of us as responders, as people who are trying to create response capability within our organizations that is robust enough in order to stand up to the challenges of a genuine crisis event. And I think that one of the things that we need to do is to try and simplify things as much as possible. We don't know what a crisis event will look like. We don't know how it will impact us. We can't have a plan for it, but what we should have is capabilities. And then we put those capabilities in place. So what I'd like to do now in this second section of the webinar is I would like to look at how that impacts on us, or what we can think about in terms of what we do with it. When I work with organizations, which I have I'm lucky enough I do that all over the world. I've just come off a course yesterday, and what we do is we always speak to crisis managers and security managers, and we ask them, what is the principal cause of failure in crisis management? And I'm asking you now, and please feel free to answer, but the principal cause of failure in crisis management is almost always communication. It comes down to communication. At some stage, communication gets lost. And it seems to me that if as organizations we just say, okay, we need to think about communications, what does that mean for us, both in terms of normal status and preparation, but also in terms of how would we communicate, how would we maintain communications within a challenging event or a crisis event? It seems to me that just by asking that question, we would actually become better. We would understand more. But we have to understand what communication means. And communication means transfer of information. So communication is what you do. What you wish to achieve is information exchange, information transfer. So if we went to our bosses and we gave a briefing to the boardroom about crisis management, we said, we need to look at communication. We need to look at transfer of information. It seems to me that would be a very, very good starting point. But that would be what the lawyers would say is necessary, but not sufficient. We need to do more than that. So it is not just a matter of transfer of information. It is a matter of transfer of complex information. How do we manage complex information? But it goes beyond that, because we now got to think about how do we manage the transfer of complex information under pressure. It's easy to do that at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting in the boardroom, when you can make sure that you understand things and ask questions and go back. And how do you do that under the pressure of a crisis event? How do we maintain, when our own infrastructure may be failing, when we may have had some catastrophic impacts on our own organization, when there is uncertainty, there is chaos, there is fear, there is panic, and we must not forget, during a crisis event, we're operating under massively adrenalized situations. So our own adrenaline is going up, and our organization's adrenaline is going up. And what happens when you become adrenalized, both personally and organizationally, is you lose capability. You forget things. You misunderstand things. You cannot do what you could have done without adrenaline. But there's one more thing I think we need to add to this to make it complete. So we need to have the transfer of complex information under pressure between multiple stakeholders. And it seems to me that if we have three organizations, one of which does not understand this, one of which understands, just went too many buttons there. I've lost my buttons there. Hands in one moment. Okay, so if we have three organizations, one of which understands, one of which does not understand this at all, doesn't even think about it. One of which understands that we have communication and transfer of information which we need to think about. And one of it which understands that as an organization we have to ask ourselves and question ourselves, what is our capability within a crisis event to manage the transfer of complex information under pressure between multiple stakeholders? Then it seems to me that just by asking that question, we'll be really setting the foundation for creating what we call crisis resilience, crisis capability. And therefore, the most important function of crisis management, if we're to do anything, it is to manage information exchange. Within a crisis, people do not need to be told what to do. You don't need to sit in an office and tell somebody 300 miles away, you need to get out of that building. They will understand that. The question that is always asked, the number one question which is shouted repeatedly, is not, what shall we do? The question which is always asked is, does anybody have any idea what just happened? And what does that mean? So your ability to gather information and to make sense of it is critical and will give you a massive advantage within any crisis environment. If we look at what that looks like in a practical sense, the slide I've just put up on the screen is the FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, SITREP, Situation Report Network in New York. FEMA is in the middle, and then what you have is you have various agencies around it. And what's interesting, if you look down on the bottom, right at the bottom, just slightly to the right of middle, you'll see that that's the president. So what is clear is that even within this schematic, within this framework, the president himself, or herself, if it comes to that, but at the moment himself, is not involved. You know, these are busy people trying to do a hard job under pressure. The president doesn't need to be involved. And I think there's a lesson there for every CEO that, you know, the people, you have to trust your people to get on with it. So this is a SITREP, and there's a network. It's a network analysis, and there's many lessons. We can spend a lot of time understanding how do we make that work and what allows it to be applicable, what allows it to be effective. So it has to be routine, it has to be normalized. There has to be specialized people who understand how to use it. But most of all, it has to be part of your normal working relationship. The truth is that you should not try and do anything for the first time in the middle of a crisis. Anything that you do not use normally, do not use in a crisis. Do not try and use a new communication system in a crisis. That will just become part of the problem. But the truth of the matter is this is normal operating status. And what happens is, what can we expect if something actually goes wrong? Then there'll be a change. And the change that will happen if something actually happens is this. And suddenly the communication goes off the wall. So what we have is we have an initial surge. In any situation, at that moment, the communication goes off the wall. And the question I have to ask you is, within your organizations, do you have the ability, or does your infrastructure have the ability to manage, maintain, and support the instantaneous transition from this to this? And the answer is no, it doesn't. I mean, no organization does. We don't have the bandwidth to do that. And therefore, from the beginning, it seems clear that we are losing information. We don't know what we don't know. What Donald Rumsfeld famously said was the unknown unknowns, the unks. We don't know information that we don't know. And yet this is only partial of it, because this is only part of the problem. Because anybody who understands this is social networking analysis. It looks at how networks work. Anybody who understands that will say, yes, but David, you're not being fair, because what you've done is a closed system. You have only mapped the connections between the organizations within that network. Now, the truth of the matter is that both for these organizations and also for everybody who's listening to this webinar, you within your organizations are gateway connectors. You have your own networks which you interact with. And so everybody is a gateway connector. So if we now open up from a closed network to an open network, we do third-level mapping, and we look at what these people are connected to, then the truth of the matter is that the communications we have to develop and manage is not just internal connected communications, but we have to manage the external communications as well. And the 23 major organizations within that network have 1,263 dependent agencies. These are agencies, not people, agencies, each of which is saying, what the hell just happened and what do we need to do about it? And therefore, our ability to manage the information in and around and between those people is absolutely critical. And it seems to me that as risk and crisis managers, our fundamental responsibility is to create a framework which is strong and robust enough to survive a crisis event, and then to maintain functionality, not 100%, but to maintain functionality in terms of running information around the system. If we can keep information going through the system, we are in with a chance. If we fail in that, then we've lost it and we're down forever. So that's in terms of looking at the networking. What we can now look at is the next aspect of that, which is crisis in a corporate environment. Now, I see we have over 300 people listening on this, which is fantastic, and I'm very, very happy. I've just seen somebody's pulled up, will we be sharing the slides? Yes, we will. I'm pretty sure that IRM, Institute of Risk Management, will be sharing the slides with us from that. So I imagine that quite a few of you are working in corporate context. You know, you get up in the morning, you go to work, you go to a corporate context, and you try and deal and understand what does risk and crisis management mean for those organizations. And as far as from a strategic perspective of a corporate organization for a crisis event, we're looking at something like that, which is a major impact on your share price. And these are all very, very bad days in the office. Those are all share prices. And as you can see, they're all pretty catastrophic failures there. Top left-hand corner is G4S, which, of course, is a global security company, which was responsible, so-called, for managing the security around the 2012 London Olympics. And 6 weeks before the Olympics, they said, sorry, we can't do it. And that was the impact on their share price. Top right is Volkswagen. Their share price over time when they started discussing the emissions scandal, which of course was not only technical but reputational, global, and you saw the impact that had on their corporate price. Bottom left-hand corner is Tokyo Electric Power, who was TEPCO, who are responsible for the nuclear reactor that was hit by the tsunami in Fukushima in March 2011. And if you look down on the bottom, over the course of 4 months, they lost 100% of their share price. Bottom right is BP, British Petroleum, after Deepwater Horizon, after the oil spill in the Gulf of Texas, and that's cost them $60 billion so far, and it's going to cost them a lot more before they get out of it. Now, the truth of the matter is that if you are a risk and crisis manager, when you get up in the morning, there is nothing to say, today is going to be the day, are you ready? If you had said to the head of security of the World Trade Center in New York on September the 10th, 2001, name me 100 things that can go wrong tomorrow, 2 planes flying into his building and knocking them down would not have been on that list. And for the risk and crisis managers for all these organizations, and for every other organization, but for these organizations on the slide in front of you, when they went into work that morning, it was a perfectly normal morning. They were running billion-dollar operations, and by 4 o'clock that afternoon, they had the danger of going out of business. And nothing had prepared them for that, and nothing could prepare them for that. And so the question is, what can we do? How can we understand decision-making within something for which we have no preparation? So the next part of what I want to talk about is just understanding crisis decision-making, what it means for us. The first thing about crisis decision-making is that there is time pressure. Within organizations, although we think we have time pressure, we usually have time to breathe, to look around, to talk to people, to review. Within a crisis situation, that disappears immediately. So, for example, you might have, shall we evacuate the building? Shall we not evacuate the building? Well, there's no time to discuss that or decide. You have to make a decision. Shall we pull people back from the bridge? Shall we close the airport? Shall we make an announcement? We don't know. In 2008, in the financial global crash, when the American government had to decide to save Lehman Brothers or not, in the morning, that problem did not exist. By that afternoon, and certainly within 48 hours, the decision makers had to make a decision that was going to affect the American and the global economy for the next 10 years. And there was nothing that had prepared them in the morning when they got up that this is going to be the day that is going to happen. The next thing we have is rapid escalation, in that the event itself is not stable, but it is changing, it is unstable, it is mutating, and it's probably getting worse. So by definition, the situation we are discussing now is already historical. And by the time we put our decision out on the ground and people start acting on that, it will have changed again. And therefore, you're always under pressure. There's this massive pressure involved in your decision-making. At the same time, there's a lack of information. So often, it is not that there's a lack of information, there's a lack of verified information. So you're getting information from everywhere, but it's often contradictory, it is partial, it is confused, it is unverified, it is not time-stamped. And therefore, what you're trying to do is, at the same time you're making decisions, you're trying to make a picture. You're trying to work out what's happening, what does it mean, what's the impact, what's the significance. At all times, you have everything else going on around you. So we can see now already this sort of, it's no longer a rational, managed situation. It's becoming more chaotic. It's becoming more stressed and pressured. And it's going beyond what we are expecting. If you know what the answer is, or if you think you have a solution, then it's not a crisis. And if it's a crisis and you think you have a solution, you've probably misunderstood the situation. General Stanley McChrystal, who was head of forces in Afghanistan and was a fantastic both warrior and a philosopher and a thinker. And I've heard him speak in London, and he said that anybody who came from Washington to Afghanistan and thought they had a solution had to leave the room, because if you think you have a solution, you haven't understood the problem. To a large extent, in terms of crisis management, if you think you have an answer, you haven't understood it. So if it's a true crisis event, it's outside anything that you would have conceived of or thought of or prepared for. And if you have conceived or prepared for it, then the truth is it's probably a major incident, not a crisis. Moving on, there's a need to make decisions. We can always say there's always a balance. The truth of the matter is the longer that we wait, the more information we have. The more information we have, the better the decisions we make. So time equals better decisions, and yet we don't have time. And therefore, we are always making decisions on the basis of incomplete and often unverified information, and yet we have to make the decisions. And yet the truth of the matter is we can do that. That's not difficult. Well, it's not difficult. We can teach people to do that through experience, through good mentoring, through training. Somebody can take these things on, and these are skills and capabilities that we can look at in terms of, can we create good decision makers? Can we train people to do that at every level? And the answer is yes, we can. The problem is the last one. The problem is the last red arrow I'm going to bring up in a minute. And the last red arrow, unfortunately, destroys everything. And the last red arrow is the fact that there's catastrophic consequences. There are catastrophic consequences to what decisions you make. People will die. when Rittel and Weber was writing about wicked problems, which was what we're discussing at the moment, one of the things they said was that within the context of a wicked problem, solutions or potential solutions or suggested solutions are not right or wrong, or even good or bad, because we have no way of knowing whether it's right or wrong. Can you imagine being in the North Tower of the World Trade Center and deciding, do we stay in the building or do we evacuate? There is no way of knowing what is the right answer within those environments. And therefore, according to Rittel and Weber, it is not right or wrong or good or bad. It's only useful or not useful. And therefore, because it's gone beyond everything we prepared ourselves for, the fact that there are catastrophic consequences means it is very, very hard to prepare to do that. I've spoken to CEOs of billion-dollar companies who said, yeah, but David, I make decisions every day. I make $100 million decisions every day. I make decisions to close down factories with 10,000 people. I said, yes, but that's what you do. That is, for you, that's normal. But what's happening within a crisis event is it goes beyond normal. You are not prepared for that. And those catastrophic consequences is something we can't prepare for. So what we have to do is we have to try and find a way of at least minimizing the impact, minimizing the risk, and maximize our capability to respond. So what we have here, we have a situation where I was giving this presentation, and I was asked, yeah, but what's the benefit? Can we demonstrate the benefit to an organization from understanding this? We get it, we know it, it makes sense intuitively, but can we demonstrate to our boardroom the benefit from taking this on? And I said, well, that's a very good question. Thank you very much. And so I went away back with my team, and I came back with this next slide. So what I'd like to do now is to talk about, the benefit of effective crisis decision-making and what it can do for us. The truth of the matter is that when we have an event, the event itself is unexpected. And we have what the Americans, I understand the Americans call left of bang, right of bang. Left of bang is preparation, right of bang is response. And right of bang in terms of crisis is always unexpected, it's always shocking, it's also always adrenalized. And yet, what we have to do is right from the beginning, is we have to start making decisions. And as you'll see from this curve, and of course it's just a nominal curve, it's just an example, but basically at the beginning, you're making lots and lots of decisions. And as you go through time, 3 hours, 6 hours, 12 hours, 2 days, 3 days, 2 weeks, etc., then the decision-making plans out, it stabilizes. But at the beginning, you have these incredible shocking decisions you have to make. And with the decision-making, we're balancing it against one other thing. And what we're balancing it against is information. So here, you can see for the information curve, it's the other way around. We have very little information. And then over time, we start gathering a lot of information. And the information starts coming in. We have more information. The information itself becomes more verified, becomes more stable, more trustworthy. And at the point that information and decision-making cross, we can now say that we have, for the first time, informed decision-making. So we're now, it may not be perfect, but we're now making informed decision-making. We have evidence-based or information-based decision-making. So the benefit we can demonstrate to an organization from understanding this is to say, well, if through training and preparation and understanding and modeling and creating corporate capability, if we can bring the information further forward, earlier in time, if we can gather more information than the organization next to us, if we can make more sense of that, if we can integrate it, if we can create a cohesive picture out of it, then what we clearly have is we have informed decision-making coming earlier in the game. And by doing that, we can demonstrate the differentiator between early decision-making, information gathering and sense-making, and later information gathering and sense-making. One of the things I think that we have as a problem, and I'm sure that everybody has as a problem, is we have to show impact. It's very difficult sometimes to explain to board members and to other stakeholders what exactly it is that we do and what it is the benefit we bring. Anybody who works in any academic work knows that one of the things you have to achieve is you have to show impact. You have to demonstrate that you've made the world a better place through your research and your writing. And I think we have the responsibility to demonstrate to organizations the impact of what we're talking about. And we can define and we can discuss the impact in two terms. We can define and discuss the impact in terms of the differentiator between us and our competitors in the market. And there is no question about it, within chaos there is opportunity. And if we understand chaos and complexity and we can recover better, there is opportunity. But we can also demonstrate the benefit between the organization we would have been if we had not discussed this, and the organization we are now because we've discussed it. And it seems to me that if we take the slides on communication, being the transfer of information, and as an organization, do we understand the significance and the impact of the ability to have the transfer of complex information under pressure between multiple stakeholders? It seems to me that we are demonstrating a significant differentiator in terms of our capability. And in terms of taking that information and then creating sense out of it and then sharing it effectively through our network under the pressure of a crisis event, then we are clearly demonstrating, although we may not be operating perfectly, we are certainly improving our ability to survive. One of the differences between a major incident and a crisis is you manage major incidents and you survive crisis. Crisis you don't manage, you survive, and then hopefully after that first tsunami wave of shock has hit, you're still standing, and then you can start trying to put something in place. And this slide in front of us here, I think, demonstrates the benefit to any organization. So what we've done is we're coming up just about, as I'd hoped to do, to about an hour. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to sort of finish this up. And then if anybody has, I see there's a couple of questions up there. If anybody does have any questions, please feel free to throw some questions at me. We've got 15 minutes left. And then hopefully we can sort of create a dialogue. And if anybody has anything to say from that, then I'll be very happy to interact with that. So before we do that, I would like to give you a gift. You're all busy people. I appreciate you giving me an hour and a quarter of your lives, which is very appreciated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you your next crisis report. So whatever organization you're involved in, and whatever the event might be, this will work for you, I promise you. One of the things that we do on the courses, and I'll come to that in a minute, we're running a course with the IRM next month. One of the things that we do is we look at reasons for failure, and we look at why organizations which are very, very effective and efficient organizations fail miserably. And we look at things like British Petroleum. We look at things like BP, about NASA with the Challenger and the Columbia space shuttle tragedies. And we look at a number of other organizations, 3 Mile Island, for example, and TEPCO in Japan, and Japanese government's failure, and the failure of FEMA in terms of responding to Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. And we say, well, these are not dysfunctional organizations. Your NASA is not a dysfunctional organization. British Petroleum is not a dysfunctional organization. Why is it that they failed so badly? And the truth of the matter is we then put up reports or summaries, executive summaries from their reports about their failures. And the truth is you can cut and paste those and you can switch them around, and you can put the report from NASA into the BP report, you can put the BP report into the into the Fukushima failure report, and they work exactly the same. You can't tell the difference because the events themselves are unique, but the reasons for failure are just repeating themselves time after time. So this slide, which I'm going to bring up next, which is your next crisis report, has been cut and pasted from an executive summary of a major event, which I'll tell you about at the end. But I think that it would work for you. So basically, you can keep this. When you have your next crisis and they ask you to do a report, all you do is you basically put the date at the top, you put your company logo on it, sign off on the bottom, and there you go. And for those of you who are consultants, of course, you can then charge for a day. Why not? Because we're all consultants. And that will save you a bit of time and make you a bit of money, which is always good. Okay, so here we go. So this, my friends, is your next crisis report. The ability to acknowledge risk and learn from exercises has not been sufficient. The ability to implement decisions that have been made and to use the plans that have been developed have been ineffectual. The ability to coordinate and interact has been deficient. The potential inherent in information and communication technology has not been exploited well enough. Leadership's willingness and ability to clarify responsibility, set goals, and adopt measures to achieve results have been insufficient. In the opinion of the Commission, these lessons learned are to a greater extent applicable to leadership, interaction, culture, and attitudes than to a lack of resources, a need for new legislation, organization, or important value choices. Now, I hope that wherever the 313 people listening to this are in the world, that will make sense to you. And you will recognize the organizational vulnerabilities and failures and weaknesses that allowed that report to be written. It could have come from 100 reports. This one actually came from the Utøya Island massacre. Some of you may know, some of you who don't know this, it was in Norway in 2000, a few years ago. Anders Breivik, who was a right-wing fanatic, an anti-immigrant fanatic, went to the government headquarters in Norway, in Oslo, outside the police headquarters, and blew up the headquarters, killed 2 people. Then, dressed as a policeman, he went to the port, got on a boat, went across to a small island, Utøya Island, where a political party was holding a children's youth camp, and then he shot 69 children. And you can imagine the shock that this created in Norway. And this report came from the Norwegian police about themselves. And it seems to me that they could have said, listen guys, this is terrible. But at the end of the day, we're the Norwegian. We've never dealt with this. We've never even conceived of this happening in Norway. You know, we look after tourists. We might have a road traffic accident. We might have a problem at the airport. And he'd just blown up our headquarters, and he'd killed 2 people. I mean, can you imagine the chaos? And it seems to me they could have made that, but they didn't. And what they said was, if we are the Norwegian police agency, we do not have the luxury to decide which crises we will be ready for and will not be ready for. Our responsibility is to be ready. And if you look at this report, what is clear is it doesn't mention the external event. It has nothing to do with the external event. It doesn't matter what the external event is. It is about internal organizational vulnerabilities and weaknesses. And it seems to me there's a lesson to be learned for us all here about taking responsibility and about understanding our roles. Risk and crisis management, even at the highest level, it's not magic and it's not voodoo. It's about good people doing their jobs properly and effectively, often within challenging environments, often within organizations that may not recognize their expertise or their ability to contribute. But that is part of the game of the jungle that we are involved in. And it seems to me that if we are to take on the responsibility for doing crisis and risk management at this level, then dealing with organizations and showing some leadership and understanding how that works is part of the game. So I would like to thank you very, very much. We're now sort of an hour and 5 minutes in. We've got 10 minutes to go. So that's the end of the actual presentation. Before we finish that, I'd like to mention that the IRM, Institute of Risk Management, is hosting a course with myself, a 3-day program in London. If you've seen, or if you follow me on LinkedIn, or if you go onto LinkedIn, this 3-day program is something I run all over the world. We've done 14 countries so far this year. It's designed for experienced risk and crisis managers operating in complex environments. It's a UK government recognised qualification, a level 5 management qualification. It's Ofqual regulated, so it's recognised. If you go to the UK government official register of qualifications, it's on there. The University of Portsmouth have recognised it with 20 academic credits against their degree in security and risk management. At the end of it, you get post-nominals from the Institute of Strategic Risk Management, which is another organisation I'm involved with. But we've already run one of these with the Institute of Risk Management in London. They're hosting another one on 29th to 31st of October. We're very happy. If you please go, you'll see at the bottom of that slide, there's Deirdre Lawler, who I believe is sitting in on this webinar right now. She's a contact at the IRM. Feel free to get in touch with her. And if you are, wherever in the world you are, you think that could be of use to you or be of interest to you, feel free to get in touch with Deirdre, and we'd be happy to work through the IRM and put something on for that. So that is my bit up now. We have exactly 9 minutes left. What I'm now going to go is go into the questions and see what some of it is. Okay, most crises cause cascading failures. How do you plan for the domino effect? That's a brilliant question. The truth of the matter is we can't, because we just can't map it. The thing about complexity is that we can't map complexity. And for those of you who know about understanding complex organizations, is that it does cascade down. Therefore, in terms of capabilities, we need to be able to respond. So in terms of the domino effect, what I would say is we have a basic mantra which says we can't impact or influence the event. We can't influence a hurricane or a tornado or an earthquake or an infrastructure failure or as or a satellite effect. So we can't influence the event. We can mitigate the impact. So we can try and put something in place to mitigate the impact. We can manage the consequences. The consequences which occur over time, we can manage it. But what we can take control of is the response. So in terms of that, we can't plan for the domino effect, but if we put some of the things in place that we've spoken about, then we can start creating our own response capability, robustness, resilience, rapidity, decision-making, sense-making, interoperability, information exchange, and all of those things that allow us to create a framework. So that's that question. If my SOP, standard operation procedure for standard incident fails, does this qualify this event as a crisis? Not necessarily. A crisis can be defined in many, many ways. What we define a crisis as is it goes beyond your capability to manage it or to engage with it effectively. So it is not necessarily the scale or the scope or the impact of the event, but your capability gap. If your standard operational procedure for standard incident fails, I don't think it would immediately go into a crisis. It could become a routine emergency in that it's more challenging, but I don't think it should be existential. Though that depends, of course, on the environment you're operating in. So, for example, if you're on a nuclear power station, yes. If you are, as we use, say, if your job is packing parachutes, then any problem is a potential crisis. So it depends on the environment that you're working in. And what about having regular mock crisis exercises in order to be ready for real tasks in natural disaster events? Fantastic question. I'm involved in a lot of tabletop exercises. I was on the academic planning team for Exercise Unified Response in April 2016. And that was the largest exercise ever held in Europe. I think there's 4,000 responders, 7 countries. It's very hard to put that together. I think you should have regular tabletop exercises, and you should have 2 objectives. One objective is that you actually practice and understand what you should be trying to do. So, for example, if we say we can, get 200 people out of the building in 12 minutes, can we do so? But the true value of tabletop exercises is the social capital, the fact that people are interacting with each other, they're talking to each other, they're building connectivity, they're understanding each other. And we would always recommend that you actually run an exercise over 2 days. Because at the end of the first day, everybody goes to the bar, at least in a UK and a US environment, and sits standing at the bar and talking is when you really build your connections. And there's no doubt about it. You can definitely see a difference on the second day in terms of the level of interaction, interconnectivity, and just the fact that things is much richer in terms of the event itself. Training and organized action plans, again, that's part of your ongoing capability development. Training should be an ongoing part of what you do, and it should involve everybody. When we do exercises, for example, when we work with organizations, we tend to have a 5-day consultancy program, and one of that is a tabletop exercise in which we say don't just bring yourselves in, but bring in outside, bring your friends in, bring other agencies in, anybody you have dealings with. Use it as an opportunity to create a rich learning environment. So that's that. Let's have a look at what else we've got. I think that's about it. That's about it. So I can see that. Hey, thank you. 5 stars. Thank you, everyone. I've just had a look at that. Thank you, everybody. I've really appreciated the opportunity to share this with you, with the community. There's 322 people up there now. Thanks to the IRM. I'm sure that wherever you are, hopefully there's been something of value to you. The IRM runs a lot of these events. Please do support the IRM. And if you want to be linked on with me, I'll be very happy to be linked up with you. Hopefully we will have the opportunity to meet somewhere down the path. And I wish you all the best and God bless and be safe. And thank you very, very much for your time. So I'll give you, I'll stay on the line for the next 3 minutes, 2 minutes and 30 seconds. If anybody wants to come in, then that'll be fine, and I'll answer that. So let's just see. What about the political conflicts? Political conflicts is very, very interesting. I mean, I've worked in, I spent 2.5 years based in Nigeria. I was there in 2015 when they had the presidential elections coming up. I've been around in the Middle East a lot, Southeast Asia. Political conflicts is part of what you're doing. You know, anybody who's working in Africa knows that the ability to deal with political conflicts and to maintain some sort of functional stability or stable functionality, whichever way you want it, within that environment is part of what you do. I think it's part of what we do. You know, I think if somebody says, I'm a jungle guide and I will look after you in the jungle, but I do not do mud and I do not do rain, then they're not really much of a jungle guide. And I think in terms of strategic risk and crisis management, we have to accept that the environment that we're operating in and what differentiates what we do from anybody else is complexity. If it was simple, you don't need us. And so to a certain extent, we become interesting and valuable the more complex the environment becomes. Political conflicts are not random. You know, if you're working in Africa, if you're working in if you're up in, if you're trying to do some work down in the Niger Delta, for example, on Port Harcourt in Nigeria, if you're working in Sudan, if you're doing work in Somalia, if you're over in Ukraine, if you're in Qatar, if you're in Venezuela, the environment and the political issues around that is part of the environment you're operating in. And you need to have expertise in that just like in anything else. You go in, every environment works on its own terms, and experience and knowledge and understanding and respect and listening just allows you to do your job better within those environments. There is no magic, but in the last 30 seconds of this webinar, what I would say is that I think the integral belief that we all have, everybody on this webinar, is, myself and yourself who are listening, we believe that we can actually make a difference. And if we didn't believe that, we wouldn't get up in the morning. So I hope this has been of use to you. I personally have really enjoyed it, and I'd welcome, if you want to get in touch with me on LinkedIn, I look forward to hearing from you, and then perhaps meeting down the path somewhere soon. So as I count down to the last 2 seconds, thank you.